Hey guys, Tammy here, and today I'm going to talk about writing for court. I feel like writing is one of those things that people struggle with a lot, and it's something that pretty much everybody has to do in family court at some point, whether you're writing to give it to your attorney to utilize or whether you're writing it because you're self-represented or whatever. Written declarations are kind of the main thing that the court uses to gather the information. Now, as always, if you like my content, please hit like on this video. Also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified when new videos are released. And don't forget to share on your social media so that other people going through this can find the help that they need. Let me just say this is going to be a 3-part video series on YouTube, okay? Because I can't, I don't want to overwhelm you with this super long video. So we're going to kind of chunk it into 3 parts. And this today is the first part. So if you like today, come back because in the next few days here, there's going to be part 2 and part 3. I think one of the biggest struggles that people have in writing is you need to be brief. All right. There is a lot to be said for being concise. I think when we write too much, we almost overwhelm the court with so much to read and so much information that your key points get lost. Brevity is really, really important. And when I say that, let me just give you this little exercise that I think is helpful in doing this. So one of the things that I try to do is in the first instance, you just want to sit down and write, right? You just want to do a brain dump, just get it all out onto the paper. The problem is I've seen a lot of self-represented people who do that, who kind of just vomit everything out onto the paper. And then that's what they submit to the court. Well, no, you need to vomit it all out onto the paper. And then honestly, if you have the luxury, leave it overnight or at least for a couple of hours and then come back to it and start trying to organize it into something cohesive and cutting out pieces of it that aren't useful. We usually want to try to tell more things than we really need to. So getting very focused is important. And I'm going to give you more tips as we go along on kind of how to do that. But you really have to be as brief as you possibly can and try to take a high level kind of bird's eye view of the situation. What you're really trying to do in this, and this is my point number 2, is you're really trying to tell a story. You're wanting to paint a picture for the court of what is happening in this family, what the dynamic is, what the history of it is, how things have functioned for the children. And because the court's goal is going to be to try to keep things as in line with that as they can, recognizing that they can't preserve all of it. Just, once you get a divorce, certain things are disrupted. I've had people that say, well, the child's always with me and never with the other parent, and that's how it's been, and so that's how it should continue to be. Well, no. Once you get a divorce, it doesn't work that way anymore. The child won't be with you all the time. Now, if the child is with you all the time, should there be a transition phase, for the child? Yes, of course. You're not just going to throw them into being gone from one parent all the time. Usually courts are pretty sensitive to that. But essentially, you want to tell the story of how it's been, what has been happening, and what you think would be best for the child in the future. And so you have to think of that like a story in your head and not just vomit out onto the paper the list of poor qualities of the other parent, which is what we see a lot. A lot of times it's just a list of attacks on the other parent. You want to weave that more into the story. If you have concerns about the other parent, that's fine. Maybe you do. But weave that into a story of why that's happening and not just, oh, the other person's a jerk because they're doing A, B, C, and D. That's not generally as effective. The third point that I really want you to understand, and this is something again that people struggle with, is that when we say evidence, people get really hung up on some external piece of evidence like a photograph or a message in a parenting app or an email string or, whatever it is. People get really hung up on evidence being, they'll say, I don't have any evidence. I hear that a lot. I don't have any evidence. And here's what my late husband Thomas used to always say. He would say, you have to understand that your testimony about something is evidence. And then when we say testimony, that means either oral or written. So when you're put on the witness stand in a trial and you're asked questions, that is your testimony in regard to what is happening. That testimony is evidence in the case. Now, how reliable an evidence honestly usually comes down to your credibility, the amount of credibility that the court sees in you. How consistent have you been? How much have you done what you said you're going to do? Does what you're saying make sense? Does your story hold together? Is how I've heard judges describe it. And how do you present on the stand? Are you scattered and all over the place, or are you confident in what you're saying and know what you're talking about? And, all those kinds of things. So that testimony is evidence. And the other kind of testimony is written testimony. So when you write a declaration for court, or some jurisdictions call it an affidavit, it could be called that as well. But when you're writing some kind of narrative form of what's happening for the court, in a declaration or affidavit or anything like that, that written testimony from you is also evidence. Again, it goes back to, is that evidence credible or not as the judge is reading it? And the same things apply as far as like, does the story hold together and all those things that I just talked about. But the other challenge that you have when you're doing written testimony is organize, not just the pieces that are there and those pieces making sense, but organizing it into that comprehensive story that flows and that makes sense for the court. We have to remember that judges are lawyers, right? And they went to law school. And if you don't know anybody that went to law school, ask them how much writing, how much reading do they have to do? I mean, Thomas said it was just like the volume of books that he had to read and the number of papers he had to write and all the different, things like that was just almost the way he described it. It's like, you feel like, how could one person even do all that? School was a full-time job and it was pretty much 24/7, except for when he was asleep, which was kind of very little through law school. So it was very heavy and a lot of writing. They've become very good writers most of the time by the time that they, graduate from law school. And, some are better at writing than others. I mean, I'm lucky in that Thomas was just a phenomenal writer. It was one of his biggest strengths, and so much so that we've even had other attorneys hire him to do writing for them on like appeals cases and different things like that, because he really is just that good at the writing. This is something that he knew a lot about, how to organize the thoughts and how to make them make sense. When you're writing for a judge, you have to keep in mind that they're a lawyer. Putting it in sort of that logical, sequential, organized kind of manner is going to give it more credibility. Even the way it looks on the page, is it organized or is it just this one big run-on page of what you're saying? You need to break it up into paragraphs, number your paragraphs, maybe have little headers for each section of what the key, thought that you're talking about or whatever. But you want it to look organized. You want it to tell a story. and you want to keep it as brief as possible because you want that evidence to be credible. In the next video, I'm going to share more tips with you on the writing issue. But if you would like to learn more about my coaching services, please go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's a link on that page. You can book time with my staff to learn more about my coaching services and how I might be able to help you on this journey. Okay? See you next time.
We'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands.